Hi guys, welcome to our webinar on this beautiful, bright and windy day in the Noongar season of Camberang. For those of you who are here in the southwest, obviously different around the country and around the state. So you're here for our third webinar. Thank you very much for everyone who's given the time to be here, and particularly to those who have been here for the other two in the lead up. It's great to see people taking part in all three so far. So this webinar is one of four. It's been delivered to you by Nature Play with support from the Education Department. Our topic for today is a fantastic one. It's loose parts. And loose parts are just such a fantastic example of the way kids' brains work and the way play inhabits learning and learning inhabits play. You know, when you've got those loose parts out there, it's open to kids to be able to explore all the things that are going on in their minds, the things they're working through, the things that they're exploring and imagining. So loose parts, you know, we can look at it as adults and see a collection of stuff. A child's going to look at it with that kinesthetic brain and with that creative brain and with that socially connected brain and see so many opportunities. And it's just a perfect example of the power of outdoor learning to sort of give kids that license and that freedom to take the things they find around them and have some agency and some control in how they turn those things into opportunities to learn and to share. And for all of us who have seen kids working with loose parts, we know just how wonderful that can be. So a couple of things, just to remind you guys that I know when you're on this outdoor learning journey, it's very easy to feel like you're out on a limb, you're exposed away from the curriculum. But of course, the reality is that teaching and the curriculum can very much be a part of outdoor learning. The two things are not disconnected at all. But also to remind you that you're part of a global movement. Outdoor Classroom Day has just passed 1 million children in Australia participating in Outdoor Classroom Day over the last 4 years. And we've still got a couple of weeks to go before the day lands. So that's going to go up even further. But I think it's 1,034,000 Australian kids have participated in that. So if you're on the journey to increase the amount of outdoor learning in your centre or your school, just do know that you're not alone. You're part of something big and something growing. So with that, I'm going to pass you on to my wonderful colleague, Denise Ansing, our Playful Education Officer, best title in the world, to take us from here. So thanks, guys.
Thanks, Griff. I'd also like to welcome everybody to the third webinar in our series about outdoor play and learning. Hello, everybody. It's my pleasure today to introduce our outdoor learning consultants, and that is Trudy Bennett and Daniel Burton.
Hello, everybody.
Thanks for joining us today. We're looking forward to you sharing your understanding of the value of loose parts and just how important they are for children's learning. Loose parts are an engaging and motivating way for children to learn, and they can utilise a range of repurposed and natural materials as resources for outdoor play and learning. So in our first conversation today, we will be investigating some of the thinking behind the theory of loose parts and how they can enhance your outdoor learning and play program. As we're speaking, please send us your questions. Trudy and Daniel will answer them in our after this first conversation. So we'd love for you to participate and send your questions in, please. We'll also invite you to participate in a poll question, which is simply this: how much are loose parts currently used at your school? There's a choice of 3 answers: not at all, only at recess and lunch times, and regular integration into learning experiences. So we're interested in how much you're currently using loose parts at your school. We'll launch this poll just before the second conversation. So in part 2, we'll discuss some more practical aspects of loose parts play, sourcing them, managing them, storing them. And if you've got any questions about these aspects of loose parts play, please send those in as well. Trudy and Daniel will answer these questions right after our conversation there. So Trudy, let's start off with a definition and explanation of the philosophy of loose parts play. What's the rationale for using loose parts?
Well, loose parts play is essentially parts that are loose that you play with. And what I love about loose parts is how open-ended they are. Now, they can be either recycled materials or natural materials. Either way, but because we're from Nature Play WA, we're going to focus on the natural materials. But places like Ramita Creative Reuse Centre or Tip Shops are a great source of the recycled versions. And they're also multisensory, so it's a part of our learning where we can be kinesthetic, we can touch, and there's different texture. It's got different smell to it. You tap different things together, they make different sounds. So there's so many different sensory engagement for these materials as well. And they don't have a singular purpose. So a lot of the toys and educational objects that we have often have a particular purpose, a particular way to play with that thing or to engage with that object. With loose parts play, you can engage with it in a whole heap of different ways. So just, thinking of a stick, and there's a fabulous book of, it's not a stick, it's all these different things it can be. And it's not gender biased, so there's not ones for girls or not ones for boys. Both girls and boys love sticks or gum nuts or leaves or rocks. All these things are loved by lots of people. And when you see lots of them together, then that's when it gives that object value, and you also have your imagination tweaked. It's like, oh, look at all these amazing things I can do with this. So also in loose parts play, it's really important to have a lot of that particular item.
Thanks, Trudy. That's a great introduction. So Daniel, what's your understanding of the benefits? How can the children benefit from using loose parts in their play?
Well, I think one of the first ways that loose parts benefits children's play and learning is that they encourage the development of creativity and the opportunity to play and be playful. So if we're talking about the example, very simple example Trudy just gave then of a stick as a loose part that can be used in play and learning, there's a lot of versatility in that particular object. The other benefit to using loose parts is when we're using loose parts for things like construction, building, they're not going to fit together perfectly. Say, for example, like a construction element in a classroom might do, or if you're using something like an MAB block, they fit together and they stack nicely. Whereas if you're using sticks, they're not going to stack well. So you're going to need to develop resilience, because there's a chance that when you're using them to stack or build a shelter with or create with, it might fall down, it might break. You might have to try again and again. So loose parts encourages the development of resilience and persistence, perseverance, because they're not standard. They're all different.
That's right. So I'm hearing you say all those dispositions for learning, which we've touched on in the past webinars. I'm going to share a slide now. It's a quote from Simon Nicholson, and I would just like to pop that up for everybody to read. Daniel, Simon Nicholson proposed the theory of loose parts. Here's a quote from his article called How Not to Cheat Children, the Theory of Loose Parts. I'll just ask you to read that for us and just explain your thoughts on that. Those comments.
Daniel,
all right, go on, Trudy.
About this one.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
In any environment, both the degree of inventiveness and creativity and the possibility of discovery are directly proportional to the number and kinds of variables in it. So Simon Nicholson was an architect of children's play spaces, and so what that means is that the more objects you have and the bigger diversity of objects there are, the more creative that children can be with that. And I've been really fortunate to be involved in a project with Nature Play WA and the University of Western Australia in a place research study. And I got to visit a lot of early learning centres. And what I found was that the centres that had a lot of fake grass and fence, hard surfaces of concrete, a sandpit and some plastic toys, so looking at playing games with loose parts with that range of children compared to playing games with children in areas where there's sand, mulch, logs, bushes, trees, some play equipment as well, and a whole heap of like leaves, flowers, gum nuts and things that fall down. So part of the project was to try and invent games together. And the children that had the more natural spaces with a variety and diversity of nature in their yard were a lot more creative and imaginative in their games that they were playing. All children were really excited to play the loose parts that I brought, but the ones that were in an environment where they had this all the time just showed a lot more fantasy and imagination in their play. And so for me, I just get really excited about it. It's like, oh, the more that we can expose children to these loose parts, the more imaginative and creative they will be.
Thanks, Trudy. And I'm just going to pop that quote back up for people. It must have been a little bit fast for some of the people. So it's in any environment, both the degree of inventiveness and creativity and the possibility of discovery are directly proportional to the number and kind of variables in it. And that's from Simon Nicholson, back from the 1972 actually, and he proposed the theory of loose parts. The downloadable resource for this webinar lists some examples of materials that we can use for loose parts. But Daniel, what are your favourite materials?
I think I'm going to continue with the idea of a stick.
Right.
I love the idea of a stick, and ironically, sticks are the resource that very often get cleared away from school yards, early childhood centres. We have gardeners who come in and clear spaces of sticks that fall from trees. Now, what better way to collect resources than resources that fall from trees for us? So I think a stick has so many possibilities. Long sticks, small sticks, short sticks, thick sticks, logs, big branches. I love after a storm because a storm often creates the opportunity for more loose parts. So a stick has endless possibilities.
That's actually so true. And I'm also loving storms for that reason as well, Daniel. What are some of the most interesting play scenarios that you've observed using loose parts?
That's a good question. I think one thing that comes out for us a lot in the work that Trudy and I do is the role of playing the adult world. We spoke in the last webinar about David Sobel's play motifs and about that idea about creating small worlds or fantasy and imagination. We see shops, cafes, and things created when we give children the opportunity to play, explore, and learn with loose parts. So they create cafes, they create shops, they have enterprise, they sell things, they make things to sell. Loose parts become currency, they become forms of money. We have exchange, there's trade, so many different ways that the loose parts enhance the play that the children engage in and create opportunity for collaboration, social development, language, the list goes on and on.
Thank you. What's the teacher's role then, Trudy? How can they enhance the learning that takes place?
I think number one is to be playful alongside your students or the children in your care, because when you get into that area of play, then you can actually give value to what the children are doing because you're doing it as well. So when a child comes up with you with a loose part and is really excited about it, be excited back, share that joy, point out features of it that you really love. And then if you find some imagination sparked in your head too, play with that. So one example I've got of how I've worked in that playful sense to give value to something that a child has done and then made it grow from there even bigger is a couple of children picked up a river stone. I said, oh, this looks like a dinosaur egg. And I was like, yes, it looks exactly like a dinosaur egg. What was that noise? Oh no, I think that was a mother dinosaur. She touched her egg. Quick, grab the egg, let's go hide. And then we started this hide and seek game. It was so much fun. All this role play about dinosaurs and mothers and eggs and nests, and it was, I still remember, it was amazing. The other thing that we can do too is have a look at what schema, if we think about Piaget's schemas, the foundational building blocks of children's learning, what is it that the children are exploring with that loose part? And then how can you kind of up that challenge for them? So one thing that children love to do is put loose parts into containers of water, say, and children would transport them from one jug to another. Something you could do is like get a spoon or something and transport that object with a spoon to increase fine motor skills and coordination. And then of course, think about in your lessons, where can you incorporate loose parts in your lessons instead of standard counters or MAB blocks, because they've got so much more possibility and imagination.
Thanks, Trudy and Daniel. That's really enlightening for an introduction to loose parts. Trudy, you're starting to talk about the role of the teacher in the classroom and the learning and so on, and that's going to lead us into the question and answer. I can see the first question from Kate is just asking about that. So what we'll do is stop there and encourage everybody once again to share their questions with us so that we can ask you, Trudy and Daniel, for some answers. So now's the time to really pop those questions in, everybody. And we'll start with the first one from Kate. This is, what learning area most benefits from using loose parts?
Cool.
Questions to start with.
One particular learning area. I think that's a tricky one.
Design technologies in primary curriculum, I think it's awesome because you're building with things all the time. I also use a lot of cubby stuff in HAT.
Yeah.
Like looking at geography.
Yeah. If you're using multiples of the same resource, so maybe gum nuts or gum nut caps, leaves, that definitely lends itself to numeracy, counting activities, going back to the idea about a stick, length, so measurements. In the outdoors, you can utilize the objects that you find to explore area, perimeter. So definitely numeracy is a wonderful opportunity.
Chemical science, because you're mixing things, and there's the transformation possibility as well.
And then I guess from the imagination point of view, these loose parts are open-ended. So language and literacy opportunities exist there when you, describing the resources, the loose parts, or using them as inspiration for storytelling and narrative writing.
So there isn't just one.
No.
Exactly. You're going along, you nearly touched on every learning area there. I think out on visual art, and I know, Trudy, you love it.
Well, yeah.
Loose parts for
health and PE, movement, drama.
Yeah. So the short answer is
everything.
All learning areas can be used. Yeah,
definitely.
Thank you. Here's a question that's anonymous, but I'd like to hear more about catering for students with disabilities in the outdoor environment. So how can you use loose parts for children with disabilities? Obviously, that's quite a large
disability it is. I'm thinking of some of the things that we've done with children with multiple sclerosis and not being able to move much or being stuck in wheelchairs, and a lot for them is that they don't get to touch the world, that they're just stuck in their chair and they have very limited movement of their body. So it's like, and it's children with cerebral palsy is as well the same. So we like to bring the objects to them, and then also thinking about if you're transforming the objects, it's something Daniel and I do a lot, is whittling. It's like, how can you provide another hand for them? So like using a clamp to clamp a stick onto their wheelchair tray, and then they've got one hand free where they can do some whittling. So just like problem solving, and often it's about bringing nature to them and where they are.
That's right. Yep. No, go ahead, Daniel.
I think I was just going to say, in regards to the fact that loose parts provide open-ended opportunities, there's often more scope to be able to think creatively and involve the rest of the class in supporting that particular child to see ways that you can support them to engage with those loose parts as well.
Thanks. And Anne's got a question about a school. We had loose parts play at our school, but it kept causing conflicts, so we cancelled it. What would you recommend to reintroduce it?
One thing that causes conflict.
Back inspired to use the loose parts. What can she do?
Yeah, one thing that causes conflict is not having enough loose parts. So it goes back to that need to have the multiples to share around. We've heard stories of places that are setting up like nature playgrounds in their school, and they've got like a cubby building zone, and then the children only have enough sticks to build a cubby as a group with 3 sticks. And it's like, well, that's not enough sticks to build a cubby. And so of course they're going to go and pillage other cubbies to get enough sticks. Often conflict can be the part of the play. And another reason is ownership. So if someone's created something, they're really proud of what they've created, and often they feel like that this is something that they'll keep forever. It'll be forever at the school because they've created it. And I think that's something that needs to be supported in terms of how to break that down to say, okay, this is something we're just creating for a little while, and then the objects need to go back to a pool to be shared again. Or you can create the object, but as soon as you stop using it, then it's fair game for anyone to come and use it. So having some kind of expectations built up with the children at the beginning about how long their sense of ownership is going to last for. Great, thank you. I was wondering how, this is anonymous, so the question is, I was wondering how you go about dealing with the creatures when they're outside. So maybe lizards, maybe snakes. The anonymous person lives in regional WA, so she's always, or he's always a bit unsure about snakes. What do you recommend with that?
So snakes are a part of our Australian environment, so we do need to be aware that they exist and they're in our environment. In the 16, 17 odd years that I've been doing this work, I've seen 5 snakes in environments where children play, and 3 of those have been out at an outback camp, so actually in the bush. So not to say that they aren't there, but in our school environments, in our early childhood settings, I think because of the foot traffic, it's less likely that snakes are going to be around, but we still need to be aware of them, put them in our benefit risk assessments, and then have processes like not having piles of sticks that are stagnant for long periods of time. So moving those resources around, having different ways to store them. And I know we'll get to that in the second section of the webinar. The other thing would be to discuss with the children those risks and those hazards, but also to be aware of the times of years, the times of year where those hazards are more prominent. So when are the times of the year when snakes are going to be coming out, and it's actually about now. Another experience we've talked about in the past is bees, and when children have shoes off in playgrounds, and where bees are collecting, because there's a time of the year when around now when there's more blossoms on the trees, bees are more prominent in the playgrounds, in the schoolyards, on the ground, because they're collecting the nectar, and they're actually getting honey drunk. They're falling on the ground, having a bit of a nap, and then getting up and flying off. But in those times, the chance of bee stings in the playground is higher. So maybe that's the time of the year when shoes on is an important element, and we need to move our loose parts play around away from the bases of trees where bees are found.
That's right. So you're really identifying teachers and students need to be aware of their environment is essentially what you're saying. And once they're aware of potential risks like that, it's part of their risk-benefit analysis, which we will get onto. Because, yeah, you're right, there's ants, bitey ants, little stinging things, lizards, all sorts of creatures around. We don't want to just separate ourselves from the world. We want to still use that space. So thank you. Is sharing and social and emotional intelligence an important part of loose parts? So, how much?
Core. And I think this is one of the benefits and one of the rationales of loose parts as well is to encourage cooperation and negotiation. So, the same with that, running out of supplies or ownership issue with conflict. It's about helping children work out the negotiating skills to talk to each other and communicate why that's important to them, what they're planning to do with it, how much they need. These are all very good vocab skills to have. And then when you can share how you're feeling and what your plans are with other people, this is when collaboration comes in. And sharing ideas is a big one too, and especially with more and more children on the autism spectrum. Being able to share your idea and then let go of your idea and take on somebody else's idea. And how do we make an idea grow by taking elements of all these ideas in our group to make an even bigger and better idea? So how ideas can grow and build together as a team is a really exciting thing to do with children with loose parts outdoors.
Thanks. And here's one from Mark. What is the ratio of adult supervisor to students when they play in the yard? So how do you manage the supervision?
I guess we could do a whole webinar just on that one question, because we then have to ask the question about the context. So how old are the children? What specific spaces are they playing in? Is there climbing and more dangerous elements of a playground involved?
Is there boundary fence?
Yeah, I would come back to the experience that we get told about all the time in playgrounds, or especially of schools that have implemented nature play spaces, loose parts, cubby building, and more open-ended opportunities for children's play, that their prevalence of things like bullying, conflict, actually drop. And the role of the teacher, the role of the educator in that space becomes less about solving conflict and solving those, oh, so-and-so did this or so-and-so did that, and more about getting involved in the play that happens and extending play. So it comes down to what age group, and I guess going to your guiding documents from the Department of Education, that's where I would be looking to those ratios and those questions. But I think children need much less adult supervision than we say they do.
Thank you. Everybody, we'll have another question and answer session after our next conversation, but we'll just pause there because we've got a poll question for you, so your chance to be involved. Keep submitting your questions though. We'll have a look at those in the next couple of minutes. So here is the poll question. How often are loose parts currently used at your school or centre? So your first answer option is not at all. Second option is during recess and lunch times. The third option is regular integration into learning experiences. So we're asking about your school, but if that is a little bit hard to answer, feel free just to refer to your own setting. After the poll, we'll start our second conversation about all the how to store, how to manage, how to present loose parts. So we'll just give you a little bit longer to answer that question, thinking about your setting. Okay, thank you. Our second topic of conversation today, Daniel and Trudy, is very, very practical. And this is where we really encourage people watching to ask their questions, because you've got a lot of experience about the practicality of loose parts. And if people want to find something out, now is the time to ask. We'll start off with sourcing items, Daniel. You've mentioned some of your favourite loose parts in the first conversation, heavily on the sticks. But can you give us some ideas of where to go looking for these, for other recycled or natural materials besides sticks?
Okay, so I'll try to stick away from sticks. I guess, so I spoke about after a storm or after a really windy time of the year is a good time to collect resources in your natural environments. A tip when collecting resources would be to go to a local park and the grassed area where the lawnmowers normally go, because you're going to be helping the caretakers of that space by removing large sticks, rocks, and gum nuts and things like that from those spaces. And that way you're not taking them from around the base of trees and shrubbed areas where they may be used as animal or insect habitats. Curbside collections is one of my favorite places. Be mindful of not pulling over really quickly and causing an accident when you see an amazing pile of sticks on the curbside. But even around your local neighborhood, seeing people pruning and getting rid of those things from their garden, that is a treasure trove of opportunity to find loose parts materials. talking to your gardener on site, because often they will mulch resources, loose parts, natural materials. And we go to many schools where we see skip bins out the front filled with what I would consider hundreds of dollars worth of resources for in and out of the classroom. So having a great conversation and relationship with your gardener. And then things like tip shops. One of the most exciting examples that I can actually give from visiting adventure playgrounds in Berlin was a lot of them have a board out the front of their adventure playground that is a communication to the community. We're really needing cardboard tubes at the moment. We would love some pallets. Large floorboards that aren't being used is a resource that we need right now. The options are really go on and on, but having that board out the front that communicates to your community, your parents, and even your local men's and women's groups is a way to get more resources into your school.
Thanks. And Daniel, we've actually in our resource created a list of a lot of those ideas that you've mentioned for people to refer to after the webinar. So thanks to you for giving examples there, and please look at our webinar resource afterwards, everybody, and you can check on those. So the next thing, Trudy, is presentation. How should we present our loose parts to the children?
I think there's 3 different options really. The first one is just to leave it in nature as it falls from the trees. So if you have a space where, or if you can plant a space that has a lot of shrubs and trees with gum nuts, leaves, flowers, sticks that can just fall on the ground, and then there's your loose parts. You don't have to do any fancy storage of them. You don't need to clean up afterwards. They're just there. The second way is if you have some beautiful containers or baskets or something outside, or some bins or tubs where children know that's where they go, and children know how to clean up at the end, but also they know where to get them from. So they don't have to constantly ask you for that resource. They know exactly where they can get it from. They can source it and access it themselves. They don't need to wait for permission, but there needs to be some kind of cleanup culture. So whether that's a class responsibility at the end of lunchtime, or whether you need to clean up all the things that you finish using immediately after you finish it. Some kind of cleanup culture needs to happen with that idea. The third way is for those more precious, small, loose parts, things that you might have collected as an educator, and that's to have something that is packed away in a box and put into storage. And then you can get that from the resource centre and bring it out if you've got a particular tabletop activity you want to do, or a particular maths lesson where those things are going to be ideal, or art or whatever. And then immediately after that session finishes, the children help you all pack it away and it goes back again. So there's 3 different ideas for you there. I think the easiest one is to just leave it in the environment if you can.
Exactly. However, storage, Daniel. People often are worried about how to store their loose parts. What does it look like? Where do I keep all my bits and pieces? What do you recommend for sorting and storing loose parts?
Yeah, I think first of all, we need to remind people that it doesn't need to be stored necessarily. And that comes back to the idea about aesthetic. And we need to remember that adult aesthetic is often very different from the children's aesthetic, because something like a collection of resources like fabric and sticks and branches and leaves and twigs and gum nuts in an environment to a child has beauty attached, whereas adults walking past might see it as a pile of junk. So we need to remember that different aesthetic, and we can communicate to the parents, to the community, to the gardeners, the importance of that child's aesthetic. But if you do need a space to store them, you can get sulo bins, like our garbage bins, in different sizes, where you can have collections of materials that has a lid to close it to keep snakes, spiders, and creepy crawlies out, rain out as well. Small containers, plastic containers and tubs, old shelving units, or treasure chests that might be around in the community would be an awesome opportunity. And we've seen a lot of trolleys used as an excellent way to store but also transport loose parts. So you can get those industrial trolleys that have 4 wheels and a big handle and a big basket that all of the objects can go in, and then that can go in a shed or a storage unit or on the edge of a veranda or outside a classroom, and the children can be involved in moving those things around too.
Thank you. While we're talking about the practical aspects of managing loose parts play, I'd just like to invite all the listeners to share any great storage ideas that they have at their school. So if you're watching and you've got a great storage system or a great, type of container that really works well, or any tips you've got, if you'd like to just pop them into the chat for people to read through, that would be really fabulous. So please get involved as much as you'd like with that. Now, I'm wondering if you have any safety rules around loose parts. What would you recommend for safety?
Yeah, again, that depends on the age and context of the space you work in. But one thing that I highly recommend is at the beginning, going through a benefit risk assessment. So the benefits, why are we doing loose parts play? Why have we decided to bring this here? And then the risks, what are the hazards out there? And that'll depend on the age of the child. So for babies, it might be swallowing something small and choking. For kind of older children, it might be swinging a stick around and whacking someone on their head, so there might be like different hazards. So have a think about those. And with the older children, you can actually get them to come up with that those ideas of hazards, because they're actually really good at it. And when they are able to share that, then they feel like they're empowered. So they've got a sense of agency, and they actually want to do this, because what you're providing is fun and playful. So they want to be able to do this, and they'll quite happily come up with some ways that they can suggest to manage those risks as well and control them. And so obviously with the babies, you're going to have to do this yourself and look at the supervision and how you're going to manage that in your educational setting. But with the older ones, get them to say, okay, what are you excited about doing loose parts play? Does this mean for you? And then what are those hazards? And then let's come up with some guidelines or rules together. And then you could even put that in like a poster that you get professionally printed on outdoor material, or you laminate and you put outside. They could go around to different classes and give a presentation on what the safety rules are. Matches in with your health curriculum too, being safe, as well as design technologies. So a really beneficial thing to do.
Thanks, Trudy. And I actually have seen that at a school. It was a blackboard, and just all those rules were just, or guidelines were just written down in chalk that obviously been talked about together, and they were just there for everybody to see. So that's a great tip as well. Daniel, I know there's some schoolyard myths that you're keen to talk about. So would you like to expand on those?
Absolutely. I think schoolyard myths is an excellent one that we need to be aware of, especially when we're talking about outdoor play, outdoor learning, outdoor classrooms, and especially loose parts. We hear stories from a lot of teachers that are trying to implement loose parts play in the playground, and they come across often members of the administration or other teachers in their school who say, oh no, you can't use tyres, for example, in a playground. There's a policy against that, or that's not allowed in schools. These things are not okay. And I guess the question I always ask is, show me that policy. Show me that proof, because often it's hearsay and it's urban myth. So it's often, it's happened once, or potentially there has been an incident with a particular object, like someone's cut themselves on the inside of a tyre. Those tyres have been removed, and then it's been said that tyres are not allowed in the school playground. Whereas if that's happened, then I'd be asking, how did that happen? What could we do to prevent it? And an example with tyres is, I know a lot of schools paint the inside of their tyres white. That's an opportunity to check the inside to make sure there's no loose wires coming out and disregard those ones. And also white on the inside of a tyre helps spiders be more observable in those tyres. So challenge those myths.
Thank you. Thanks, Daniel and Trudy, for those answers for our conversation today. Now, time for more questions from people watching. A couple of good ones here for you. Just reminding everybody to put your questions in. This is our final Q&A time. Get those in right now. First question from John. What's the difference between a risk and a hazard? Could you just clarify that again for us?
Oh, so risks are things that we do want. So we do want children to be able to take risks because that's how we learn. But we don't want the hazards. So the hazards are the things that we can't see. So things like, Daniel was just saying, the inside of black tires could be a hazard because a black spider will be hidden on that black tire and might be attracted to that dark as well. So that's a hazard that can't be seen, and that's why people are worried about those things. So we can manage that risk, that hazard, and lower the risk of being bitten by a spider by painting that white. So that hazard then becomes more visible. So the hazard, the things that we can't see, and the risk is what could happen to us, but it's also about knowing that. So for like instance, tree climbing, children know that there's a risk of them hurting themselves from falling out of a tree. The hazard might be a thin branch that might break, or a dead branch that they don't know about. So it's about teaching them about how to manage that risk to ensure that the worst case scenario doesn't happen. But they still need to make that choice. I'm capable of managing this risk, or actually no, it's too scary. I'm not yet capable of managing that risk myself.
That's right. So the risk is actually good for children, isn't it? It's part of their social emotional development and their self-regulation, and that's how they learn about themselves and what they're capable of.
Yeah, and you need to learn how to manage that, as a child. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to manage that as an adult when hazards can become a bit more serious.
That's right. So you can't just remove all risks from childhood. How do you encourage kids who are hesitant or refuse to play outside, asks Medea. So those children who are not so keen.
Wow. We're seeing more and more of this in the work that we're doing with children outside as well. And I say this is even more reason why we need to do this work and support children to move outside. Trudy mentioned earlier about the role of the educator jumping in and playing and bringing enthusiasm and creativity and playfulness into that environment. That's going to help. Often our adult fears are projected onto children as well. So if we're not feeling comfortable or we're not quite okay with being outdoors with children, sometimes that can have an impact on the child's urge or comfort level with going outdoors as well. So modeling, even if that means if you're not happy getting down and dirty in the bush or in your playground under trees and building with sticks, maybe just challenging yourself to do that as a way to encourage your students to do that as well. And small exposure, bring resources into the classroom that get them used to using natural loose parts material, then take it out onto a veranda or a quadrangle, and then take it further, go into lawn and grass, and then move, transition in different steps.
Thank you. This is an anonymous question. Any ideas for loose parts in a sandpit area aside from containers and shovels, etc.? So I guess, Daniel, this is linking with what you've just said. So maybe there are children who aren't so keen to get out fully into nature, but how can we start in a sandpit in the class, outside the classroom?
I instantly go to rocks. If you can put in some movable river stones or even limestone spalding, like small rocks within that space. Yeah, awesome things to get like buried and moved around and stacked and put on top. Planks of wood would be awesome in that. PVC pipes, sticks. Yeah, same, really. Yeah. I think the small things will get lost, and then the texture of the sandpit will eventually change, and maybe that's okay. We're again talking about aesthetic. Does a sandpit need to be pristine white sand all the time, or can it have mulch and gum nuts and things, threaded through it, and it changes its consistency? Is that okay? I mean, other places I've been to have more formal objects come in. Like sometimes they might bring some dinosaur toys into there and have dinosaur toys with all those rocks and other different objects and see what happens, and then take the dinosaur toys away. Bring some farmyard animals in, or bring something else in.
Ice. Ice is a wonderful loose parts material.
That's right. You can also put a little bit of tarpaulin into the sandpit, sort of dig a big hole, put the tarp in, and then fill it up with water. So you've got a little pond. Yeah, black plastic. So all sorts of ideas there. Sometimes you can also have a digging patch separate to the sandpit. So Trudy, if people want to keep their sandpit nice and clean, I guess, to have a separate digging patch.
In just the school dirt, wherever you are, and they can experience that dirt, or you can bring in other types of sands, yellow sands, red gypsum, river sand, a bit grainier kind of gravel, gravel. You can have a whole different range of digging pits.
Exactly. Sounds exciting. Nicole says, though, what age group best suits loose parts?
I'd say 0 to 99. And then it's got to do with the type of material, the size of material, and the number of each object that you have. And the beautiful part about natural loose materials is they lend themselves to different age groups, and they provide almost a rites of passage, because a 3-year-old isn't going to be able to move around the same size log as a 10-year-old is. So there's some ownership that goes with the ability that comes from being able to use different loose parts.
I like the idea of the rites of passage, actually. Yeah, so the younger children could look forward to when they can use the big kids' materials. Amy has said she has a dirt area that the children love to play in. It's under a messy tree. Do you recommend any particular type of dirt for that space?
It sounds like there's already dirt there. And a messy tree. Does that mean that lots of loose parts fall on the ground already?
I think so, yeah. I think she's got lots of nuts and leaves and all sorts hanging down. Maybe it's not a very deep dirt area, so she maybe wants to make it a bit more full.
Yeah, so I'm thinking about digging pit straight under a tree. You've got the tree roots there, and whether that needs to be protected. So maybe just a small section of that a bit further out for a digging pit. And then, yeah, if you raise it up, so a type of clay, for instance, would be able to keep its form and level on top of that. So one school we know uses red gypsum. So that would be something to look into. Otherwise, mulch. So having mulch and leaves and nuts all mixed in can be really, really fun as well.
But I go back to just that idea about a pile of yellow sand. One of my favourite experiences as a child was when, as a family, we were doing paving out the back, and a giant trailer load pile of yellow sand got dumped on our driveway, and that was my play space for months.
For the summer.
I think we've all got memories like that.
I guess if they're smaller children, possibly a little clamshell with some dirt in it could be positioned under the tree as well. And that way the children could still play in the dirt, not affect the roots, but still have the pleasure of playing in the dirt as well. Hopefully that answers Amy's question anyway. You've started something here, Daniel. How can you help kids handle sticks safely, now that you've spoken so much about them? Who's concerned about this?
101.
So when we're working with children and sticks, we talk about the fact that a stick has 2 ends. So it's about awareness, especially with sticks that are longer than your body or taller than you are, to be aware of where the end of the stick is. If we're walking with sticks and it's a really long stick, carrying the lighter end in your hand and having the heavy end drag, that's a wonderful opportunity for collaboration, because you might need 2 people to carry the stick. Does your area provide opportunity for children to be big with their movements with sticks? Spin them around, because ultimately a stick is going to become a stave or some form of weapon. So are you providing space and opportunity and area to do that? And what is the discussion you're having around about respect for yourself, your own body, and others? It's a wonderful opportunity to talk about awareness. And it comes back to what Trudy was talking about the benefit risk assessment. Talk with the children about it. There are definite benefits to playing with sticks in different ways that are physical. There are some hazards that we need to help them with, but they can identify some of the risks and how they can manage those risks.
And kids can come up with some great safety rules for stick fighting games as well. they can come up with some awesome game rules around that. So yeah, give it a go.
Thank you. Mark is asking you, can you use loose parts at recess and lunch times? So just in those times, have you seen that in action at schools?
Yeah, lots of schools do that, and they'll always have some kind of container for it and bring it in if it's a recycled thing. So it might be left out for a little while, might be over a week, and then Ash class is responsible on Fridays for bringing it all back in and something like that. So you need to talk with your school environment about how you're going to have a bit of a culture of caring for that space when there's no formality around looking at that.
Thank you. Unfortunately, that's time up for the question and answer session. It's time now to have a look at the poll results. I'll just ask Nicole to launch the poll for us. So just remember, we were wanting to know when people use loose parts at their school. So we've got 14% not at all, 36% say they do use their loose parts during lunch and recess times, and 50% of people are using regular integration into their learning experiences, which is absolutely fantastic, isn't it?
That's
wonderful.
Really great.
That is great, 50%. Yeah, that's a real thrill. So thank you for the people who have participated in that poll. That's been very, very interesting to know that. Just a reminder, everybody, that you can now access recordings and downloadable resources for our first two webinars. Providing outdoor learning and play opportunities for children was the first one. Observing the 7 ways children play outside was the second one. And so they're on our Nature Play WA website. This webinar will also be available shortly with a downloadable resource for you to review. So thank you very much, Daniel and Trudy. We'll say bye for now. Thank you for joining us.
Great questions again. Thanks, everyone.
Today. Thank you. There are now 2 more webinars to come. Next week, you can join us on Tuesday, the 27th of October at 7 p.m. So notice the change of time there. It's in the evening. The topic is implementing outdoor play, and we'll be discussing the dimensions of outdoor learning and how to use technology with nature. The final webinar in the series, Creating Unforgettable Memories for Families, is on Wednesday, the 4th of November at 7:30 p.m. and Griffin Longley will be sharing his ideas for that one. So now please complete our survey after the webinar so you can receive a certificate for taking part in today's professional learning. Thank you for your participation, and back to you, Griff.
Hey guys, just me to sign off. Thanks again. I know you've been thanked a lot, but it's fantastic to have you with us and to know that you're committed and interested and passionate about providing opportunities for kids to play, because the modern world has a way of conspiring against time and space for children's play, and it's a massive loss, because play, and I'm going to say this at the end of every one of our webinars, play is a core human inheritance. It's not the thing you do when all the important stuff is done. It's core business. It's how kids learn. It's how they interpret the world. It's how they share their thoughts, and their feelings. So look, the work you're doing to provide a space for that really is important, and good on you for keeping at it. A couple of thoughts or things to leave with you, just to know you're going to be receiving an email from us. That email is going to have links to a resource we've created for you with some details from today's session. It's also going to have a reference guide, so some of the research behind what you will have heard over this webinar and the others. There's also going to be a link to the survey. So guys, with the survey, once you've completed it and you've got it to the last page of the survey, there'll be a link through to your certificate at that point. Some people have been having trouble finding it. Just go all the way through to the end of the survey. It's us being a little bit cheeky, really. It's us trying to drag you to the end of the survey, because it's really valuable for us to know that we're providing the information that's useful for you. The other thing to know is, if you don't receive that email, it's not because it hasn't been sent. So we're sending it twice. But what can easily happen, and it's been happening for quite a lot of people, is that it ends up in your clutter folder or your junk folder, because we're sending out lots of emails at the same time, and they're going to the same same addresses, same end addresses, some of your filters are thinking that we're spamming you. So if you're not seeing that email, just go into your clutter folder or your junk folder, and you'll almost certainly find it there. Also a reminder that the webinar today has been recorded and will be put up on YouTube. We'll share a link to that for you. So if there's things that you heard today that you'd like to go back to and hear again and pick up details that maybe you didn't take a note about, just know you can just go back to the video and watch it again. And the other two are there as well, and there's going to be more to come. So guys, with that, we're going to leave you. Thank you very much once again. We're actually going to leave our screen on the wall today. We've had a couple of people say, what's on that wall? It looks interesting. So we're going to leave that up for a moment. It's probably back to front. I don't know how that works for you, but see if you can have a look.